welcome. My name is, it says in my box, Bridget Wilkinson. Oh, another person coming in. And I am the owner of Murdered for Money. And for those who don't know, we are a murder mystery company. I was going to say multi-award winning. I thought that was a bit much, but I just said it anyway. Did you notice that? And with me today, I have expert in the room, Lesley Gunn. Lesley,
can you
introduce yourself, Lesley, and tell people what you do and why you're here? Right.
So apparently I'm the expert. Okay. And apparently this is being recorded. So, you know, it's forever in prosperity that I'm an expert. My mum will be so pleased. I write murder mysteries, some of them for Bridget, but mostly for the amateur dramatics type of clients that through a publisher. So I started writing back 6 years ago, and I have 8 published, of which 6 are in my publisher's top selling murder mysteries.
Just in case there are people who are here as for new people for the writing competition and don't know what an interactive murder mystery, I just wanted to very briefly go over it. The way I describe it, and Lesley, tell me if I've got it wrong, is when you go to the theatre, you usually sit in the audience and you watch the activity on a stage. But that doesn't happen in murder mystery dinner theatre, which is what we're talking about here. In this type of theatre, the actual action of the play happens in amongst the people. The people are sitting on tables usually, and our characters will come in amongst them and talk to them, and acts will actually happen in between the courses of the meal. The audience play a really key part, because rather than just observing as they would for a stage play, there is one particular part of a murder mystery where they have to interrogate the suspects, and control of the whole evening, oh my word, passes over to the audience as they ask the characters anything they want. Now, hopefully, they ask such brilliant questions that they get all the information out that they need to solve the crime. That's why our mysteries are called interactive, because they have that interaction with the audience. Now, I'm just going to pass to Lesley, because that's how we, Murdered for Money, work. But there are differences with other murder mystery companies, and particularly amateur dramatic societies who perhaps don't have all those facilities, or possibly professional actors who want to learn so much and have time to do that. Lesley, are you all right to
do
that?
Yeah, so it's very similar. The way that most of them are written, they normally allow for a break halfway through where a meal can be served, but not necessarily. So some amateur dramatics groups, they will serve a meal, and some will just have an interval where people can get drinks. And it really does vary on, first of all, the director, the facilities, and also really what they know that their own audience is like. So it varies dramatically, but there's always that key element of the audience interrogation at one point, and it may be by shouting out questions politely, or it could be even giving the options of people writing down questions, and then they gather them all in, and then they pick questions out and ask the characters questions that way. But there's always that there's that interrogation, and there's the audience participation in that way. Not necessarily as much as Bridget's team would do, but there is always that element there.
Okay, does that make sense? Do we all know what we're talking about in terms of a murder mystery? Super.
Scenarios and settings. The ideas can come from absolutely anywhere. My suggestion to you is keep your ears open. You can hear something when you're out having a cup of coffee that somebody says, and you think, oh, and that would, you know, and you just build on that conversation, that one conversation. One of my plays was written, the punchline was written in the car. We were following a lorry, and there was a person's name on the lorry, and I just built up the punchline for who the murderer was from that name. And so I had the punchline for who did it before I even had the story. A couple of mine are very loosely based on television programs, so baking programs, dancing programs, very loosely based. But then you can imagine the competitiveness behind those things. In the situations, there's always some competitiveness going on. There's always going to be some friction. There's always going to be one person who doesn't like another person, but who has to be there because it's their job, or they're getting paid, or whatever. And just listen to things as you go around. That's my one advice to you, is to do that. But as far as the settings are concerned, bearing in mind, if you're writing for amateur dramatics, most of them don't have a lot of money. So there's no point in having a setting 1, which is based in a high-powered 40-second store floor office block overlooking the Thames with, hot and cold running waiters and all this sort of stuff. Put it in an office by all means, but make it simple, make it easy for people to stage, and where possible, try and keep the same scene all the way through. I do change, some of mine do change scenes, but they're simple changes. So, like it may go from one room to another, but they're similar rooms, they've got similar staging and things like that. So just keep it, for amateur dramatics, keep it simple and make it easy, and allow the directors some artistic license. So, amateur dramatic society down the road may only have a small stage, so they wouldn't be able to fit a huge, massive, great big hall, but they might be able to put a room. And then that room is up to how the director interprets how it looks. You can give them ideas, but give them some artistic license to do what they want. You're on mute, Bridget.
Sorry. If you're writing specifically dinner theatre for us or another company that's doing theatre, your venue is your stage, rather than you going again to the theatre and they've got a lovely set design up on stage that's, an alien spaceship or something. Your actual venue and the room that you're in is the setting. So you can decorate it to make it perhaps a wedding scene or a convention or a church meeting or things of that nature. But if where you're setting your mystery would actually be in a dinner conference room or restaurant in a hotel, then that makes things an awful lot easier for you. And Lesley is quite right. Budget comes in a huge amount. So unless you're Disney and can afford to completely transform a hotel into something amazing, we need to keep the props and the furniture as small as we can, really, to do that.
Yeah, because if you're writing for amateur dramatics, you've got to bear in mind that some Amdram teams have a tiny stage and some have a huge stage. Some have a tiny budget, some have a bigger budget. Keeping it generic helps. So I think one of the main things is to remember is that the murderer doesn't have to be evil. I know we see a lot of murder mysteries where it's really obvious who's going to get killed and why and who's going to do it. There is a really nasty person, and normally a really nasty person dies, and normally there's somebody and you think, oh yes, it's really obvious, but sometimes it might not be. So if you want that little twist, the quiet ones, maybe watch out for them. So there's always that nice little twist there, something that may come out in the interrogation that isn't really obvious. Is you're not going to get everybody's life history in 2 scenes. So there's maybe something that comes out in the interrogation and you just think, hang on a minute, maybe that little quiet person in the corner is worth a second thought.
I think with regard to my characters, is every single character should bring something different to the play. If you've got 6 or 7 identical characters, they're all very timid and they're all sitting there sewing, it's not very interesting. But if you're bringing in people whose personalities clash, whose behaviors clash, whose priorities clash, then you've automatically got tension between them. And that tension, for me, makes it interesting. And it also explains why there might be issues between people. And some of those issues might be strong enough for the person to want to kill somebody. So, for example, if you've got character 1, who their objective is to marry character 3, and you've got character 2, whose also their objective is to marry character 3, you've immediately got conflict between those people. Now, what we try to do with Murdered for Money ones is we try to make sure that everybody in some way is related in some way to each other. So that we don't have 2 people that don't know anybody else. Usually everybody knows or is related to everybody else, not necessarily in a married way or a family way, but somebody might be a work colleague or a previous love interest or a teacher from their high school, all sorts of things. But so there is that connection between people, because then you can have historical things that have happened that rise up again in the murder mystery that are nothing to do with the setting, but are hidden within those characters. I would say, moving forward, ideally for us, it's 6 plus the detective. Always have a neutral detective who is above suspicion, or you find out is above suspicion. For us, it would be 6, but that's not normal, is it, Lesley? Lesley,
No.
There's a range more, isn't there, in the ones you do?
Yeah, so some of mine have got, I think the least mine have got is 8, maybe 9. That includes the murdered victims. And it goes up to 11 on one of mine. So I don't tend to go over that, especially because most of my writing is for amateur dramatic groups.
If you're writing, I mean, I know there's people here who are writing specifically for our competition, but ideally, if you won the competition and it was published, you'd want it to be accessible to all other groups. For me, when I started writing them, it's simpler to have one person and one victim.
Decided how your victim is going to meet their demise, you need to research it. There's no point in saying that the victim died one way when it's really obvious to somebody in the audience, and believe me, there will be somebody in the audience who knows about this, that you actually need a truckload of that poison that you've just mentioned, and it needs to be administered over the course of 17 years. So do your research. You will get probably some strange looks from people if they use the same browser as you, and wonder why you're researching some really odd stuff. We even grew deadly nut. Well, we didn't grow. There was deadly nightshade growing in our garden once. And my neighbour happened to mention it, and I just turned around and said, well, I write murder mysteries, so it's for research. And she believed me. It wasn't. But you will get some very strange questions asked if you share your browser with anybody and they see your history. But it's really, really important. I mean, obviously, a knife in the stomach or in the heart or whatever, or a gunshot, easy. But, you know, if you're using something like poison or anything like that, make sure you get your facts right of how quickly it will work, how much you need, how it's administered, what these symptoms are going to be like, and all this sort of stuff, and whether there's an immediate reaction or whether it comes in gradually over what sort of time. So think about that and get your facts right, because there will be somebody in the audience who absolutely knows.
Method of murder, usually, unless it's a secret thing, for example, in plain sight, I pass Lesley a drink and she doesn't know that there's a deadly poison in it, usually...
Thank you, Bridget.
Oh, no, don't. So usually it happens off stage, and you might get the person staggering on and with blood pouring out of them. You might get somebody else going out and seeing their body and then coming back in and telling people what it looks like, things of that nature. And quite often with the dinner theatre, because we try to keep the gore away while people eat their food, is the clues that come out after the person has died, which is usually by the main course, contain forensic information or a crime scene picture, all the stuff that we don't really want to put in front of you while you're eating your dinner.
Nothing on it. That's how I do it. That's how I start. I start scribbling, and I will get scribbles, and I'll get post-it notes, and I'll put all the post-it notes on top of that piece of paper. And then I'll put all my characters on a post-it note. And as I'm writing it, I'll make sure that, oh yeah, I haven't actually told Jenny to talk with her about 3 pages. I'd better go and put some stuff in for Jenny to do. And that is how I do it. It is totally, completely random, but it suits me.
I'm slightly more structured, I guess, only because it was totally new to me. The way I write is starting with motive, means, and opportunity. The killer, and only the killer, must have all 3 of those. So they must have the motive to kill, the means to kill, and the opportunity to kill. Only the killer. If more than one character has all 3, your audience will quite rightly shout at you, because they'll say, well, this other character had the time, the gun and the whatever, and they could have done it. Oh boy, did they shout at me. If that happens. So only the killer has all 3. Now, if only one character had a motive for killing the person, or only one person had the opportunity to kill the person, it would be a very easy mystery and quite boring, really. So it's absolutely fine for the other characters. There should be more than one motive in your mystery, different people with different motives. There should be more than one, ideally, murder weapon or method of murder that's in there. And there should be more than one person having opportunities. So then you've got something that the audience have to solve. They have to find out who has got all 3, means, motive, and opportunity. So some people will have a motive, but there's no way, at no time were they alone with the victim and were able to kill them. Or at no time did they go anywhere near or have access to the sword that was found stabbed through the heart of the victim. That way, the audience can knock people off, but I think it's called having an alibi or putting them out of it. Wasn't you. I call it knocking them off, but that's probably not the right thing. Okay, so I always work from motives first, and when I really start, I have no idea. I no idea who's going to be the murderer and who's going to be the victim. All I know is I want to set it perhaps in a circus. Silly idea, because I'd have to buy a circus tent, but assuming I've got a circus tent. So how do I decide who the victim and the murderer are going to be? Well, in the document I sent you right towards the end it's called a motive chart, which I think fills Lesley with horror, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you've got there, I don't know if I can actually get it. Ooh, that would be, let me see if I can get it, because it's difficult to explain. Oh, no, I don't think I can get it. When you get to that booklet, go all the way to the bottom, and what you've got is a grid. And along the top, you've got the names of the characters. And down the side, you've got the names of the characters. And I just let my imagination flow. I go, for each character, why would that person kill that person? Why would they kill the next person on the list? Why would they kill the next person on the list? And some of the ideas that I come up are completely stupid, but I fill it all in. And then when I finish, I've got usually 36 different motives, or slightly less than that, 30 different motives for killing people. And I look at those and I go, most people want to kill this character. So that person's going to be my victim. And then I literally just choose, okay, well, who do I want as the murderer? Do I want one? Do I want two? Which stories do I like best? Where has my imagination done some great stuff that I actually want to put in? And that helps me decide who my victim and who my murderer, because unlike Lesley, who can just imagine it in all her mind, I tend to sit there and go, ah. So having that structure, making me just use my imagination and come up with stuff, however silly, usually comes up with something I think, oh yes, that would be fun. And that's how I then use that grid to start writing the stories and putting in where the motives came from, where the characters are talking about them, making sure that I put blind alleys in from the other motives, that they didn't have access to the sword and things like that. But I help find that one document just settles me onto the ground and makes me think it's possible to do this rather than impossible. But hopefully one day I'll get as experienced as Lesley, and I'll just be able to straight from a piece of paper and a pencil and do that. I'm not there yet, I have to say. And
I think they may find that there's a happy medium between the two. Yeah. So you may find that it works a semi-structured way. So you might want to do that list that Bridget does, so that you know who's got the motive and who's got your opportunity and who hasn't. And then you might actually just want to scribble it down on post-it note, you know, like character A is going to be killed by character B because,
yeah.
And then character A might be killed by character C because of this, and it might be killed by character D. So, you know, yeah. And I have post-it notes. I have a box of post-it notes. I have a smaller box now.
But I think the main thing that we found when we were talking about the different ways that we do things, it's so totally different that I think everybody must find their own way, if that makes sense, because my way not going to necessarily suit you, Lesley, as Lesley was saying, somewhere in the middle. But I think the most important thing that I find, because my audiences are quite demanding, Hannah, is that you have to make sure that only the murderer has the motive, the means. I'm teasing you, Hannah. You're lovely to have in our audience. That only that murderer has means, motive, and opportunity. Otherwise, if you find a hole, your audience will shoot you. Well, they'll shoot me, and that's not good. In the dinner theatre, probably on the table when you arrive and sit down, are 3 clues that contain background information that you wouldn't have otherwise known about the suspects. And if you look closely, there'll be things hidden in it. Similarly, after the person has died, somebody will come out and give you some more clues. Probably only about 6 in total. What I say, because Lesley gives me scripts that don't have clues sometimes, and other scripts that do have, and certainly when I use other people's, they don't have clues. That was my cat. Are you alive? Yes. What I would say is it's absolutely fine for you to suggest clues if you want to, but there's no definite need. Because my job as part of Murdered for Money is to work out what those clues would be. Knowing me, if it was a Lesley script, I'd go, Lesley, what would you put as a clue? Help me, Lesley. But nowadays you actually do clues for me, don't you, Lesley? Which is what she
makes my life easier.
Doesn't do puzzles, but she does know, but she does clues. But you don't, if you're entering the Murdered for Money, it's lovely if you do them, but you don't need to do them. In the interrogation, it's completely improvised and ad-lib. Shall I do Murdered for Money and then you do the rest of the world, Lesley?
Yeah, I'll do the rest of the world.
Again, in that handout that I've sent you on page 2, there's the format step-by-step of a Murdered for Money mystery. No clues given away in there, but it shows you how to write it, how it works. Literally, here we go. Guests arrive half an hour before the event starts and they mingle and have drinks. How lovely. And at the same time, my actors start to mingling amongst them. And sometimes it's obvious that they're actors and they're part of the story because they're dressed like a bear or a kangaroo. But sometimes it's not, because they just look like another guest and they'll tell you that they're just another guest coming to the murder. After mingling, you all go and sit at your tables, and then there'll be Act 1. Now, Act 1 usually introduces the scenario, why you're here. Perhaps you're an award ceremony. Perhaps it's a wedding of somebody, and somebody will introduce the other characters, and you'll start to see the tensions build. We then stop, and we have starters. While people are eating, we don't interrupt them. I keep telling my actors, don't interrupt them, because it's not nice. But depending on where you are, the service isn't always quick. And so while they're waiting for their food, or when they finish their food, my actors will mingling amongst the actors, and they can ask questions. That is not scripted. That is not part of the script you have to write. After starters, you have Act 2, another 10-minute act where tensions build, motives become obvious, and it just usually, by the end of that act, somebody's dead. To be honest, somebody's dead. I always try to kill people before the main course so that people have got lots to talk about over their dinner. Gives them some conversation piece, I think. After Act 2, the actors will mingle again while people are waiting for their food or after they've eaten it. We'll then have Act 3 where the detective arrives. And the detective will then lead the audience in an interrogation. And as I said, in the interrogation, the audience take over, and my actors are at the mercy of the sleuths in the room. The interrogation for a Murdered for Mystery is completely unscripted. All you have to do if writing a script for us is end Act 3 with the detective character saying something along the lines of, I need to interrogate these suspects and I'm going to need your help. Literally just so it flows onto that interrogation. After that, when people have interrogated them, usually over pudding, they get to decide who did it, and they'll submit their solution. Again, none of this is scripted. It's not part of what you have to write. Once they've all submitted their solution, there's Act 4. And Act 4 is just a short reveal where the identity of the murderer comes out. How you want to do that, it's entirely up to you. It might be the detective suddenly realizing he knows what he's doing, or it could be that through further questioning and a clue that's been discovered, it all falls apart and the people are known. And that's what we call Act 4. That's scripted, and that one you need to write. At the end of that, the actors will take their bow, and at which point we will announce who's won the prize, who actually guessed closest to got the murder and gave the reason of how and why the closest to anybody else.
And when you go to an amateur dramatics, you'll probably have scene 1, scene 2, maybe a small interval sometimes between scene 1 and scene 2 if they have to change the set for any reason. But normally scene 1, scene 2, interval. Normally the person is killed by that interval, same as the main course. And then scene 3 would be the interrogation, and again it finishes exactly the same way. That would be scripted, and it's where Bridget would provide clues for people. That's normally where the interrogation, the investigating officer will do his bit, and that's where the other information would come out that you might get clues for on a virtual.
And I just make that clear for our interrogation. The actors don't do anything, the audience do anything, but a lot of amateur dramatic society, the interrogation is just another scripted act. Yeah. So you're writing an additional act where all of the information that hopefully would have come out in questioning in our interrogation gets put into the scene so that the audience get all that information. Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, that's fine. And then there is, of course, at the end of that scene, there is the audience. It's nowhere near the sort of things that you see on the virtual ones, so it's normally 10 minutes if that, and there's a quick round the room, has anybody got any questions, or it could be you've got 5-10 minutes to write down your question and then they'll read them out. So it can vary. Again, it depends on how the director wants to run that show. It depends what they're used to, what their audience is like, but that's the general thing. And again, scene 4 is the reveal, and at the end of scene 4 it's who's won. Or sometimes who's got the wooden spoon, because there are some amazing answers that come through, and I'm sure Bridget gets them as well, especially when she reads mine. If I haven't written it, she'll get goodness knows what from me. But yeah, you do get some amazingly answers, and I've sat there and I thought, wow, I didn't realize that was going on, and I wrote the script. So yeah, that's basically it. So from that point of view, you don't have to worry about whether they're eating their breakfast or their dinner or their main course or their dessert. So
I think it does depend on the director, because it's quite a risk to give the whole thing to the audience. We're used to it now. We don't mind. We like it. It's quite fun for us doing the improvisation back. But I do understand that some companies, to give that complete control over.
So very, very similar without the food.
When I'm writing scripts, sometimes you just write across the page as if you're just writing an essay, but sometimes you write each character and their line, and then each character and their line, and that works out a page a minute. But we're not being prescriptive on how you write it, because that's not important to us. So what I would say is, when you're writing it, talk it. Yeah. Okay. Act it. See how long it takes. Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing for you. As you do more, you work out how long it will take, but act it. And certainly if there's action and movement, do that action and movement. Otherwise you'll assume, oh, that happens in a second, and it doesn't. So if you're writing for me, I would want a dead body by the end of Act 2. Right. I want to do. One tip I would say with dialogue is, people tend to write long sentences, and people don't talk in long sentences. So if you find you've got a 12-word sentence, you can probably cut it down to 6. Right. So best thing to do with that is read it out loud. And if you wouldn't talk like that, cut it. You wouldn't write like that. Right. That's the main thing, I think. What do you think with dialogue, Lesley? What's your top tip?
Yeah, think about natural talk. It's easy to write words, but it's not necessarily easy to write talk. So think about how you would have a conversation with a person. You wouldn't say to somebody, well, you might do. You might say, I say the weather is absolutely spiffing today. What do you think? And, you say, oh, bit cold, bit hot, that sort of thing. You can really condense a written conversation down when you're voicing it. I would not try to have more than one conversation going on at a time, unless it's a comedy type situation where having half of one conversation and half of another conversation would add some comedy into it, but a deliberate thing. Think of like how the two Ronnies used to do some of their sketches. They used to have one chap on the phone. There's a great scene where one is on the phone to somebody and the other one's on the phone to someone else, and they're talking completely different conversations, but you put the two together and it's really funny. Thing that is flat, not comedic, I would just stick to the one each time, one conversation carrying on each time, because especially if you're performing to people live, they only get one chance to listen, and chances are we're not all great multitaskers, because I'd probably just keep an eye on one conversation at a time. Okay, so stage directions, you do need to put them in. Basically, people need to know when they need to come on stage, what they need to be doing when they come on stage, what they're carrying when they're on stage, whether they need to be going off stage, coming to the front of the stage, going to the back of the stage, whether we're a loud whisper, and they need to know. But in the notes I've actually mentioned, you have to be careful with how you do your stage directions. You have to be explicit. No, that's not the right word. Specific. And you have to also remember that you can't direct somebody to think something. You have to direct somebody to actually do something. So the example that I put in the notes were, you can't tell an actor unless they're really, really good. And then Bridget has some amazing actors working with her, but you can't tell an actor to blush. You can't tell an actor to go grey and look faint. You can tell them to sort of wave their hands, look coy, look down like that, or to sort of, oh, like that. But you can't tell them to look something. Same as you can't tell them to hear something. You have to say, a phone rings. So there's a sound effect of a phone ringing. You can tell them to notice something, to look at something, look out of the window. But you can't tell them to hear something. You can't tell them to see something. You have to actually tell them what to look at, how to react when they hear something.
I would say there's a scale of it. For Murdered for Money, there can be too much. You certainly would need to be telling that, you know, I think your other phrase is Eddie walks in with a large marrow. I think you've written that in the notes somewhere, Lesley. Yes, we do need to know.
Love the marrows.
We do need to know entrances and exits. Sometimes you need to leave a little discretion of the acting to the actor. Now, quite often with amateur dramatics, the detail of 2 paces to the left and turn around and look at the sky is there. Whereas in theory, if you an actor that's perhaps more experienced would just know what that character was doing and do that. Now, I know some people are here purely to get some background on how we do what we do. And some people are here because they're doing the competition or thinking about the competition. If you're thinking about it after today, go to the Murdered for Money website, and at the top on the menu, you'll find Murdered for Money script writing competition, and it's all in there. I'm smiling because this is where Lesley and I do things very differently, isn't it, Lesley?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As Lesley, you go first, and then I'll explain for us and me how I do it, because we do things backwards to each other, but how both ways are fine.
However, so this is how I create my puzzle. Sometimes I can knock it out a weekend. The Halloween one that Bridget did last year, I did most of that at a weekend, actually at the same venue that it was at. But other ones, they can take months. This isn't my day job, so it has to fit in with everything else in life.
Say 2 weeks of writing, because I go away and put it down, and there's lots of different versions as it gets sort of better, and then I hate bits and I cut bits out. I would say 2 weeks of writing, not solidly, because I'm doing other stuff as well. But before that, there's at least 2 weeks of it just going around in my head and going, oh, they could do this. Oh, they could do that. So probably a month in total. But it's not, when I actually write, if you added the writing time up, if I was doing it all day, it's probably about 4 days. But it comes with the experience. I'm a lot quicker than I was before. Thing that they can see, they can hear, is up for grabs. Absolutely, I love visual clues too. I give it a go. I hadn't written anything 5 years ago, not a clue. And I know I have to do my funny way with grids and things, but actually now writing the murders is my favorite part of everything I do. I can't believe it. And what's also good is I sat out in the garden this afternoon and was writing one, and I'm really surprised because my background is logic and maths, but when I came to writing, I find it completely peaceful, and I really enjoy it. So even if you've never done it, think about giving it a go, and who knows, you could be here showing other people how to do it. But
yeah, I'd just like to say, yeah, absolutely, go for it. I wrote start of a book once, and it got absolutely slated by a publisher who said no, absolutely not, and I gave up. I met a lady on a cruise, and she said to me, don't ever give up, keep going. If it's what you want to do it. And I wrote my first murder mystery in a weekend, and I sent it off to a publisher, and I kept my fingers crossed, and they said, yeah, okay.
You see, natural flair. Right. We have to go because Lesley and I need a break and a lie down, and generally, so thank you so much for being here. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Lesley, have you had a nice time?
I've had a lovely time, but I think I need to go and feed me and the cat.